The standoff lasted 3 days. Council ships surrounded the station while delegates argued and threatened and demanded compliance. Inside, Yuna remained with her cubs in a converted recreation area that had become their temporary home, the station. Staff brought food and supplies and updates on the political chaos unfolding outside their walls. The Veteran Collective has withdrawn their claim to the cubs, Chirrut reported on the second day. They said watching the footage of Ember protecting you changed their perspective. What footage? Yuna asked. Chirrut pulled up a recording on a portable screen. It showed the moment in the corridor when security had raised their weapons. And it showed Ember stepping in front of Yuna with his body positioned to take any attack meant for her. This has been broadcast across the galaxy, Chirrut explained. Billions of beings have seen a Draconith cub choose to protect a human with its own life, and it has raised questions about the Council's approach. Yuna watched the footage with tears in her eyes. She had been so focused on the danger in that moment that she had not fully processed what Ember had done. He had been willing to die for her, a creature that had been starving itself from grief just weeks ago, had found something worth living for and had found something worth dying for. She reached out and placed her hand on Ember's massive head. He rumbled with contentment and pressed closer to her touch. On the third day, Vexamario requested a private audience with Yuna. They met in a small conference room while the cubs waited outside with Vostalik. You have caused considerable difficulty, the council leader said. I have protected creatures that your council was prepared to kill through ignorance. Yuna replied calmly. Vexamario's crystalline form flickered. We were not trying to kill them. You were trying to separate them from the only being they trust, and that would have killed them. And it does not matter whether you intended that outcome. The delegate was silent for a long moment. The council has reviewed the evidence, Vexamario said finally. We have consulted with xenobiologists and behavioral experts from 17 species, and we have watched every moment of footage from your time with the cubs. Yuna waited. We do not understand how you did it, the delegate admitted. Your methods defy our scientific models, and your results should not have been possible. I did not do anything complicated, Yuna said. I just refused to give up on them. The why? Yuna considered the question. Because someone once refused to give up on me, she said. And because every living thing deserves to know that they matter to someone. Vexamario studied her with ancient eyes. The council has reached a decision. They said, we are prepared to offer a compromise. I am listening. You will be granted legal guardianship of the cubs under a new classification, Vexamario explained. Not as owner or caretaker, but as parent, and this classification will recognize the bond you have formed and will protect it under galactic law. Yuna felt her heart stop for a moment. Parent. It is unprecedented, the delegate acknowledged. But so is everything about this situation, and the council has decided that preserving the Draconith species is more important than maintaining our traditional frameworks. What are the conditions? You will relocate with the cubs to a designated sanctuary world where they can grow and eventually reproduce, and you will allow periodic observation by scientific teams, but they will not interfere with your methods or your relationship with the creatures. Vexamario paused. Then you will share your knowledge with others so that if more traumatized creatures are found in the future, we might have some hope of saving them. Yuna thought about the offer. She thought about her apartment on Earth that she would probably never see again. She thought about the career she had built and the life she had planned, and she thought about 3 dragon cubs who had chosen to live because she had chosen to stay. I accept, she said. The sanctuary world was called Verdana Prime. It was a lush green planet with vast forests and clear skies, and no intelligent species to disturb its peace. The station had arranged for a habitat to be constructed before Yuna and the cubs arrived. A sprawling complex designed to grow with them as they matured. 5 years passed. The cubs were no longer cubs. They had grown into magnificent adult draconaths, their scales shimmering with health, their wings strong enough to carry them across continents. Ember had become the largest. His protective instincts now directed an entire territory that he patrolled daily. Ash had grown curious and explorative, spending hours investigating the forests and returning with stories that Yuna could somehow understand through their shared vocalizations and spark. The smallest one, who had first trusted her, had become a mother herself. Yuna stood on a hillside watching 3 young hatchlings tumble in the grass while Spark watched over them with patient eyes. The cycle was beginning again. The draconath species would survive. Scientists visited regularly to document the progress and study the growing population. They asked Yuna endless questions about her methods, about how she had earned the trust of creatures that had rejected everyone else. Her answer was always the same. I did not try to save them. She would say, I just tried to be there for them until they were ready to save themselves. The researchers wrote papers and developed protocols and created training programs based on her approach. Some of it worked and some of it did not, because in the end, what Yuna had offered could not be reduced to a formula. It was simply love, patient and unconditional, given freely without expectation of return. As the sun set over Verdana Prime, Ember landed beside Yuna with a ground-shaking impact. He lowered his massive head and pressed it gently against her chest. She wrapped her arms as far as they would go around his scaled neck. I know, she whispered. I love you too. Across the galaxy, the story of the human who had saved the dragons became legend. Other species studied it and debated it, and tried to replicate it with varying success. But those who truly understood knew that the magic had never been in the technique. It had been in the willingness of one small human to sit in the darkness with broken creatures and refuse to leave, until they believed they were worth saving. That was the gift humanity offered the galaxy. Not weapons or technology or conquest, just a stubborn insistence that every life matters and every heart can heal and every lost soul deserves someone who will wait for them in the dark. And sometimes that is enough to save a species. The mother of dragons looked up at the stars and smiled. She had come so far from the woman who had first stepped off that transport ship with nothing but a bag and a belief that patience could heal anything. Now, she had a family and a purpose and a legacy that would outlive her by millennia. And it had all started with a single cub who had been too weak to stand, but had taken a chance on a strange creature who smelled nothing like its mother. Spark landed beside her, hatchlings in tow, and made the comfort sound that Yuna had first heard so many years ago. Yuna made the sound back, and the dragons sang to their mother under an alien sky. Home at last. 3 weeks had passed since Spark first ate from Yuna's hand. All 3 cubs were eating now, but only from her. Their scales had regained some luster, and their eyes had cleared, and they no longer made the desperate mother call in the darkness. Instead, they made different sounds. Softer sounds, sounds that seemed directed at the small human who had refused to leave their side. The station staff watched with amazement as the once aggressive creatures followed Yuna everywhere within their enclosure. When she sat, they gathered around her. When she slept, they formed a protective pile with her at the center. When anyone else approached the barrier, Ember would rise to his full height and position himself between the intruder and his human. They have imprinted on her, Dr. Menak admitted during a staff meeting. It is extraordinary and unprecedented and completely outside our understanding of draconath behavior. Have you documented this for the scientific community? Vostalek asked extensively. The xenobiologist confirmed, but that documentation has created a problem. What kind of problem? Dr. Menak hesitated. The Galactic Heritage Council has taken an interest in our progress. Vostalek felt a cold sensation spread through his chest. Define interest. They are sending a delegation. Dr. Menak said, they will arrive tomorrow. The council delegation consisted of 7 representatives from different species. each one claiming authority over the fate of the last Draconoth. Their leader was a tall crystalline being named Vex Amariel, who spoke with a voice like grinding glass. These creatures belong to the galaxy. Vex Amariel announced after surveying the observation deck. They must be relocated to a neutral research facility where all civilizations can benefit from their study. Vostalek kept his voice carefully neutral. The cubs have only recently begun to recover, and moving them now could undo weeks of progress. Progress made by a single human. Another delegate interjected. Being from a species that only achieved interstellar travel within the last few generations, Dr. Park has accomplished what our finest xenobiologists could not. Vostalek countered, she saved their lives, and we are grateful for her service. Vex Amariel said with no gratitude in their voice, but the council has determined that the cubs require proper scientific oversight, and they cannot remain indefinitely in the care of one individual. Then bring her with them, Chirrut suggested. The delegates exchanged glances. That would be irregular. These are irregular circumstances. Vex Amariel considered this for a moment before shaking their crystalline head. The council has determined that the cubs must be separated from Dr. Park during the transfer, and they must learn to accept care from multiple species. If they are to be properly preserved, you cannot do that. Vostalek said, we can and we will. Vex Amariel replied, the transfer has been scheduled for tomorrow morning. They left without further discussion. Vostalek found Una in the enclosure, surrounded by cubs who had grown visibly larger and healthier under her care. He told her about the council's decision. She listened in silence, her hand resting on Ember's massive head. They will die, she said finally. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were not. If you take them away from me, they will stop eating again, and they will die. I know. Draconoth do not imprint on species, and they imprint on individuals. Una continued, this is not something I chose, and this is not something I can undo, and they have decided that I am their family now. The council does not care about that. Then they do not care about saving the Draconoth, and they only care about controlling them. Vostalek had no argument against that. What are you going to do? He asked. Una was quiet for a long time. Spark was curled in her lap, and Ash was pressed against her back, and Ember was watching the door with the alertness of a guard who sensed danger. I am going to fight for them, she said finally, even if I lose. That night, the station received notice that additional security forces would arrive with the council's transport ship. Una was to be removed from the enclosure at dawn, and the cubs would be sedated for transfer. Una read the notice and then deleted it without responding. She spent the night awake, surrounded by the three creatures who had chosen her as their family. She whispered to them in the darkness, telling them about Earth and about her grandmother and about what it meant to love something so much that you would fight the entire galaxy to protect it. The cubs listened with their ancient eyes and made soft sounds of comfort and understanding. And when the first light of the dawn cycle began to brighten the station, Una made her choice. She opened the enclosure door and walked out into the corridor. 3 dragon cubs followed her like shadows. The alarms began immediately. Red lights flashed and sirens screamed, and announcements blared about apex predators loose in the station. But the cubs did not rampage or attack. They stayed pressed against Una, terrified by the chaos. Trusting only her security teams appeared at the end of the corridor with weapons raised. Una stopped walking and placed herself between the weapons and her cubs. Do not shoot, she said clearly. They will not hurt anyone. Unless you threaten them, you are violating council orders. The security chief shouted, you are going to kill them. Una replied, if you take them away from me, you are going to kill them, and their blood will be on your hands. Ember let out a low growl that made the security team step backward, but he did not advance and he did not attack. He simply stood beside his human and waited for her to tell him what to do. Vostalek arrived at the scene moments later with Vex Amariel close behind. This is unacceptable. The council leader declared, "Seize the human and sedate the creatures." No one is seizing anyone, Vostalik said. He stepped forward and positioned himself beside Yuna. The security chief looked between his director and the council delegate with confusion. "Sir, I said no one is seizing anyone." Vostalik repeated, "These cubs chose Dr. Park, and taking them from her will kill them, and I will not be responsible for the extinction of a sacred species, because some council wanted to assert control." Vexamariel's crystalline form flickered. With anger, "You are defying the Galactic Heritage Council. I am protecting the last Draconoth in existence." Vostalik replied, "That is what this station was built to do, and that is what we will continue to do." More staff members appeared in the corridor. One by one they moved to stand beside their director. Beside the human, beside the cubs, the council. Delegate looked at the gathered resistance and calculated their options. This is not over. Vexamariel said finally, "No." Yuna agreed, "It is not. But for right now, these cubs are staying with me." She looked down at Ember, who was still growling softly at the strangers. "And they are making it very clear that they agree." On the sixth day, Yuna opened the inner barrier and stepped into the enclosure. The observation deck erupted in panic. "She is going to get herself killed." Dr. Menak shouted, "Someone stop her." But Vostalik held up a hand. "Wait." The cubs had frozen at the sound of the barrier opening. Ember, the largest, rose to his full height and let out a deep rumbling growl that vibrated through the chamber. His scales had lost their luster from weeks of starvation. But he was still a predator, still dangerous, still capable of tearing the small human apart in seconds. Yuna did not advance toward them. She walked slowly to the far corner of the enclosure and sat down with her back against the wall. Then she closed her eyes. "What is she doing?" Chirik whispered, "Waiting," Vostalik said. The cubs watched the human with intense focus. Ember continued growling, a constant low warning that filled the space ash. The middle cub stayed pressed against the far wall, ready to flee or fight. But Spark, the smallest, tilted its head and took a single step forward. Ember immediately moved to block the smaller cub, pushing Spark back with his body. The three cubs huddled together, watching, waiting, trying to understand this strange creature who had invaded their space but made no move to threaten them. Hours passed. Yuna did not move except to breathe. She kept her eyes closed, her body relaxed, her presence as unthreatening as she could make it. The staff watched in shifts, expecting violence at any moment, but it never came as the station lights dimmed for the night cycle. Ember finally stopped growling. He settled onto the floor with a heavy sigh, his eyes still fixed on Yuna, but his body no longer tense with aggression. Ash followed. Curling up beside its larger sibling, Spark hesitated, looking between its siblings and the human, across the chamber. Then it did something that made everyone on the observation deck gasp. It walked away from its siblings and crossed half the distance to where Yuna sat. "No, no, no." Dr. Menak muttered, "It is going to attack." But Spark did not attack. It stood in the middle of the enclosure, swaying slightly from weakness, and let out the call, the mother call, the one the cubs made every night in the darkness. Yuna opened her eyes. She looked at the small cub standing before her, saw its dull scales and hollow eyes and trembling legs, and she responded. She had been practicing the sounds for days, listening to recordings, trying to shape her human voice into something that might resemble Draconoth vocalization. What came out was imperfect, alien. Clearly not the voice of a dragon mother, but it was something. It was an answer. Spark froze. Its siblings lifted their heads in shock. No one had ever answered their calls before Yuna made the sound again, softer this time, and held out her hand, palm up, in a gesture of offering, not food, not medicine, just herself. Spark took another step forward. Then another ember rose with alarm and barked a warning. But Spark ignored it. The smallest cub walked on unsteady legs until it stood directly before the human. It sniffed her hand. It sniffed her face. And then it collapsed against her side and did not move. "Oh no," Chirik said. "Is it dead?" Vostalik checked the medical monitors. "No," he said with wonder. "It is sleeping." For the first time since arriving at the station, one of the cubs was sleeping peacefully. Yuna did not move. She sat perfectly still as the small dragon pressed against her warmth, its breathing slowly steadying into a deep rhythm. She stayed awake through the entire night cycle. Ember watched her without blinking for hours before finally lowering his head and resting. Ash followed not long after. By morning, Yuna had been motionless for over 12 hours. Her muscles must have been screaming. But she did not shift, did not disturb the sleeping cub against her side when the lights brightened. Spark stirred and lifted its head. It looked at Yuna with clearer eyes than anyone had seen since its rescue, and Yuna smiled. "Good morning, little one," she said softly. Spark made a small chirping sound that no one had heard before. Later, the xenobiologists would identify it as a Draconith comfort vocalization. The sound cubs made to their mothers when they felt safe. Yuna reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of prepared food. She did not offer it to Spark. Instead, she put it in her own mouth and ate it slowly, showing the cub that it was safe, showing that she trusted them enough to eat in their presence. To make herself vulnerable, Spark watched with intense focus. Yuna pulled out another piece and held it in her open palm. She did not extend it toward the cub. She simply held it and waited. Spark sniffed the air, looked at the food, looked at Yuna, and then it lowered its head and took the food from her. And the observation deck erupted in cheers. It ate. Dr. Menak said with disbelief. It actually ate. But Vostalak was not watching the monitors. He was watching Ember and Ash. The two larger cubs had risen to their feet and were staring at their smallest sibling with something that looked like hope. Spark ate another piece of food from Yuna's hand, then another. Then it let out the comfort chirp again and pressed closer to the humans. Warmth. Ember took a step forward. Ash followed. They did not approach all the way. They were not ready for that yet, but they were watching and waiting. And for the first time, they were considering the possibility that this strange, soft creature might not be a threat. Yuna looked up at them and made the answering call again. Ember tilted his massive head and took another step toward her. That night, Yuna slept in the enclosure, surrounded by all three cubs. Spark was pressed against her chest. Ash had curled up near her feet, and Ember lay between her and the door, his body positioned like a guard, like he was protecting her from whatever might come through. Remarkable. Vostalak whispered from the observation deck. She earned their trust through patience and presence and nothing more. Chirik nodded slowly. The humans have a saying, the small alien said. They say that love is not a feeling, but a choice, and that it is something you do every day, especially when it is hard. Vostalak watched the humans sleep peacefully among creatures that had terrified his entire staff. Perhaps there is more to these humans than we understood. 4 days had passed since Yuna first sat down outside the cub's enclosure. She had not left except to use the sanitation facilities and eat her own meals. And even then she returned within minutes. The station staff watched her through the observation deck with a mixture of confusion and growing frustration. This is a waste of time, Dr. Menak declared during the morning briefing. The cubs have shown no improvement, and Darpark has done nothing but sit there reading and humming to herself. Vostalak studied the latest medical scans of the cubs. Their vital signs were still declining, though perhaps not as rapidly as before. She asked for time. He reminded the xenobiologist, and the cubs are running out of time. Dr. Menak countered, political pressure is mounting from multiple civilizations, and the veteran collective has formally requested that the cubs be transferred to their research facilities, and 3 other species have made similar demands. The cubs belong to no single civilization, Vostalik said firmly. They belong to the galaxy. Then perhaps the galaxy should decide who is best equipped to save them. Dr. Minark pressed, because right now a human is sleeping on our floor while sacred creatures starve to death. Vostalik dismissed the meeting without responding. He made his way to the observation deck and found Chirik already there. Watching the scene below with fascinated eyes, Yuna was sitting cross-legged near the barrier, humming a soft melody that seemed to have no beginning or end. The cubs were awake and watching her. They had been watching her almost constantly now. She has not tried to feed them once. Chirik observed, I know. She has not even spoken to them directly. I know. But look at the smallest one. Vostalik focused on the cub. Yuna had started calling Spark. It was pressed against the barrier on the opposite side from where Yuna sat, its snout almost touching the transparent material. It wants to be closer to her, Chirik said with wonder. It does. Why? Vostalik considered the question. Perhaps because she is the first being who has asked nothing of it. Below them, Yuna shifted her position and began to speak in a low voice. The observation deck had audio feeds, and Vostalik activated them to listen. I know you are scared. Yuna was saying, I know everything you loved was taken from you, and I know you do not understand why you are here or what we want from you. The cubs tilted their heads at the sound of her voice. I am not going to pretend I understand what you are feeling, because I do not, and I cannot. She continued, but I lost my mother when I was young, and I remember what it felt like to be surrounded by people who wanted to help, but who could not give me the one thing I actually needed. Spark made a soft sound. It was not the distress call the cubs usually made. This was something different. Almost like a question, Yuna smiled gently. You needed your mother, and she is gone, and nothing anyone does will bring her back, and that is the hardest truth in the universe. She leaned her head back against the wall. But you are not alone, and I know you do not believe that yet, and I know I have not earned your trust, and maybe I never will. She closed her eyes. But I am not leaving, and I am not going to hurt you, and I am not going to force you to do anything you do not want to do. The largest cub, Ember, lifted its head and let out a low growl, but it was not a threatening sound Vostalik had heard enough. Draconith vocalizations over the past weeks to recognize the difference. This was closer to acknowledgement. That evening, Yuna requested a meeting with Vostalik. They sat in his office while she explained her observations. They are not just grieving, she said. They are trapped in their grief because they have no way to process it. What do you mean? Draconith are social creatures, and they process emotions through physical contact and vocalization with their family group, Yuna explained. But their family is gone, and they are surrounded by aliens who do not understand their language or their needs. And you understand them? Vostalik asked. Not fully, Yuna admitted. But I have been studying their vocalizations, and I think I am starting to recognize patterns. She pulled out a small recording device. Listen to this. She played a sound that the cubs made frequently in the dark hours. What is that? Vostalik asked. It is a call for their mother. Yuna said. They make it every night without fail, and they will keep making it until they accept that no answer is coming. That is heartbreaking. It is, Yuna agreed. But I have a theory. She leaned forward. I think if I can learn to respond to their vocalizations in a way that feels meaningful to them, I can help them move through their grief instead of being stuck in it. You want to pretend to be their mother? No, Yuna said firmly. I could never replace their mother, and I would not try, and they would see through any deception immediately. She paused. But I can be something else, and I can be a presence that responds when they call, and I can be proof that reaching out does not always lead to pain. The other scientists think you are wasting time. I know. They want to transfer the cubs to other facilities. I know that too. Vostalik studied the small human before him. Why do you care so much? He asked. These are not your creatures, and this is not your responsibility. Yuna was quiet for a moment. When I was 7 years old, my mother died in an accident. She said finally. I stopped eating, and I stopped speaking, and everyone around me tried so hard to fix me with therapy and medicine and constant attention. She met his eyes. But the thing that finally helped was my grandmother, and she did not try to fix anything. And she just sat with me every night until I was ready to come back to the world. How long did that take? 3 months. Yuna said. 3 months of her sitting beside my bed every single night without fail. She smiled softly. She showed me that I was worth waiting for, and that is what these cubs need to understand. Vostalik made his decision. I will hold off the transfer requests for as long as I can, he said. But I need to see progress soon, or my hands will be tied. Understood. Yuna returned to the enclosure chamber as she settled back against the wall. Spark pressed closer to the barrier than ever before, and when the cubs began their nightly call for their lost mother, Yuna closed her eyes and softly hummed a response. It was not the right sound, she knew that, but it was something, and for the first time, the cubs fell silent and listened. The 3 cubs huddled together in the corner of their enclosure, their scales dull and their eyes empty. They had not eaten in 19 days. Station Director Vostalik stood before the observation window, his forearms crossed tightly against his chest as he watched the dying creatures. The Draconiths were sacred to dozens of civilizations across the galaxy. And these 3 cubs were the last of their kind. Their homeworld had been destroyed by a rogue asteroid 6 months ago, and a rescue team had pulled these hatchlings from the burning wreckage of their nest. They should have been symbols of hope and survival. Instead, they were wasting away before his eyes. We have tried everything, said Dr. Menok, the lead xenobiologist on the station. The tall amphibian creature gestured at the data screen surrounding them. Live prey, synthetic nutrition, automated feeding systems, pheromone treatments designed to stimulate appetite, and even direct injection of nutrients into their bloodstreams. And nothing has worked. Vostalik said flatly. Nothing. Dr. Menok confirmed. They reject everything we offer, and they have become violent toward anyone who enters their enclosure. He pulled up images of injured staff members. 3 caretakers have been hospitalized after attempting to hand-feed them. Vostalik watched the cubs through the glass. The largest one lifted its head briefly and let out a sound that echoed through the chamber. It was not a roar or a growl. It sounded almost like a cry. How long do they have? He asked. At this rate of decline, perhaps 10 days before organ failure begins. Dr. Menok said quietly. 2 weeks at most before we lose them forever. The weight of those words hung in the air. The last Draconith in existence would die on this station, under his watch, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. There is one option we have not tried, said a voice from behind them. Vostalik turned to see his communications officer, a small feathered being named Chirik. We could bring in a human. Dr. Menok made a dismissive sound. A human? What could a human possibly do that our finest scientists cannot? I have heard stories. Chirik said carefully. Humans have a strange ability to connect with alien creatures in ways that defy logic, and they have been known to calm violent animals and earn the trust of species that attack everyone else. Superstition, Dr. Menok said. But Vostalik was quiet for a long moment. He had heard the same stories, and he had dismissed them just as quickly. But desperation had a way of making the impossible seem worth trying. Find me a human, he said finally. Find me one who specializes in this kind of work. 3 days later, the transport ship arrived. Dr. Unipark stepped off the vessel with a single bag over her shoulder. She was smaller than Vostalik had expected, with dark hair pulled back from her face and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything around her without judgment. Dr. Park. He greeted her formally. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Thank you for reaching out. She replied, her voice was soft but steady. Where are they? He led her through the winding corridors of the station until they reached the observation deck. The cubs were still huddled in their corner. Barely moving, Yuna stepped up to the glass and watched them in silence for a long time. They are beautiful, she said finally. They are dying. Vostalik corrected. Yuna did not respond to that. Instead, she asked for every piece of footage the station had collected since the cubs arrived. She wanted to see every feeding attempt, every interaction, every moment of their time in captivity. For 2 days, she did nothing but watch recordings. The station staff grew impatient, and Dr. Menek openly questioned whether bringing her had been a mistake. But Yuna kept watching. On the 3rd day, she called for a meeting. I know why they will not eat, she announced to the assembled scientists. Dr. Menek leaned forward with skeptical interest. Please enlighten us. You have been treating them like animals, Yuna said simply. But Draconith are not animals in the way you understand. She pulled up a recording on the main screen. It showed the cubs pressing together in their corner, making soft sounds in the darkness. Listen to this, she said. What do you hear? Distress vocalizations. Dr. Menek answered. They are stressed by captivity. No, Yuna said. They are calling for their mother. The room went silent. I reviewed the rescue footage. Yuna continued. These cubs watched their parents die in the asteroid strike, and they watched their entire world burn around them, and then strangers pulled them from the only home they had ever known and brought them here. She looked around at the assembled aliens. They are not refusing food because they are sick or stubborn, and they are not attacking your staff because they are aggressive. She turned back to the screen. They are grieving, and they are terrified, and they have no reason to trust anyone in this universe. Vostalik felt something shift in his understanding. What do you propose? He asked. I propose that we stop trying to feed them, Yuna said. The room erupted in protests. They will die, Dr. Menek shouted. They are already dying. Yuna replied calmly. Your methods are not working, and continuing them will only confirm what they already believe. Which is what? Vostalik demanded. Yuna met his eyes. That they are alone and that no one is coming to protect them, and that there is no point in surviving. She picked up her bag. I'm going to show them something different. How? Chirik asked. By sitting with them, Yuna said. By being present without demanding anything in return, and by proving that not everyone in this universe wants to take something from them. Dr. Menek shook his head. That is not science, and that is not a plan. No, Yuna agreed. It is patience, and it is the only thing that has ever healed a broken heart. She walked toward the enclosure door. Wait. Vostalik called out. You cannot go in there unarmed, and those creatures have injured trained handlers. Yuna paused at the door. They injured people who were trying to force them to do something, she said. I am not going to force them to do anything, and if they attack you, she considered the question, then they attack me, she said simply, but I do not believe they will. She entered the outer chamber and sat down against the far wall, clearly visible to the cubs, but separated by an inner barrier. The cubs lifted their heads and watched her with wary eyes. Yuna did not move toward them or speak to them or offer them food. She simply sat there, pulled out a small book, and began to read aloud in a soft voice. The cubs watched her for hours. They did not approach, and they did not relax. But they did not look away either when the station lights dimmed for the night cycle. Yuna put away her book and curled up against the wall. What is she doing? Dr. Menek demanded from the observation deck. Vostalik watched the humans settle into sleep, just meters away from 3 apex predators who had hospitalized his staff. She is showing them that she trusts them, he said quietly. That is insane. Perhaps it was. Lost Talek thought, but as he watched the smallest cub inch slightly closer to the barrier, he felt something he had not felt in weeks. He felt hope.